The Andreas Gruber family case at the Hinterkaifeck farm is one of the most gruesome and shocking tragedies that has haunted Germany for over a century and to this day remains unsolved. Hinterkaifeck was a small farm owned by a rather reclusive family in the Bavarian town center, located north of Munich, Germany. The deaths of 6 members of the household in 1922, accompanied by strange and unexplained phenomena, have only added to the mystery surrounding the Hinterkaifeck case. German police launched a large-scale investigation which even involved numerous psychics, but after more than a century, no explanation has ever been found for this horrifying crime. In early 1920, the Gruber family, consisting of 5 members, moved to live at the Hinterkaifeck farm in Germany. The head of the household was Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, along with his wife, Cäcilia Gruber, 72 years old, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabrielle, 35 years old, and Victoria's 2 children, little Cäcilia, 7 years old, and Josef, 2 years old. According to neighbors, the Gruber family was quite reclusive, preferring a quiet life. Andreas, the farm owner, was known to be a hot-tempered man. At their previous residence, rumors had circulated that Andreas Gruber was having an illicit relationship with his own daughter. Supporting this disturbing rumor, in 1915, Andreas was convicted of incest and sentenced to 1 year in prison, while his daughter, Victoria, was also sentenced to 1 month for the same offense. After both were released, the Gruber family became even more withdrawn and limited their interaction with others. Eventually, they moved to the Hinterkaifeck farm. Life continued in relative quiet for the family until tragedy struck. On April 1, 1922, when everyone noticed that little Cäcilia had not gone to school and the Gruber family had also not attended church, something they did every week, concern began to grow. By April 3, the teacher started to worry because Cäcilia had missed several days of school without permission, and the mailman discovered that letters he had delivered to the Gruber house a few days earlier were still untouched in the mailbox. The mailman also noted that, on his usual visits, he would often see Andreas sitting by the window, but this time he did not. However, since smoke was still rising from the Gruber farmhouse chimney, neighbors did not think much of it at first. On April 4, Albert Hoffner, the farm mechanic, arrived at the Gruber farm to work. He tried to get the attention of the family by making loud noises, but all he heard in response was the barking of a dog. After finishing his work, Albert called out to the family but received no reply. He shared this strange occurrence with others around the farm. Later that evening, a few neighbors decided to visit the Gruber farm to check on the family. On arrival, they found all the doors locked and the farm was eerily silent. The neighbors broke down the door and were met with a horrifying scene. Near the livestock barn, the neighbors found the bodies of Andreas, his wife, daughter, and granddaughter, buried in a pile of straw. When they entered the house, they discovered the bodies of the maid Maria and little Josef. Unfortunately, by the time the police arrived at the scene, the crime scene had already been severely compromised. Dozens of curious locals had wandered all over the farm, and some even helped themselves to snacks from the kitchen at the crime scene. Forensic examiner Johann Baptist Allmüller was assigned to the case and concluded that the Andreas family was murdered sometime between the night of March 31 and the early morning of April 1. All the victims were found in their nightclothes, except for little Cäcilia and Victoria. The murder weapon was identified as a small pickaxe, and all victims had been struck in the head until death. Tragically, 7-year-old Cäcilia was still alive for several hours after the attack. She had tried to crawl away and, in her terror, had torn out tufts of her own hair before she died. According to police speculation, the killer may have lured Andreas, his wife, and daughter into the barn one by one and killed them with the pickaxe. He then went into the house to murder Victoria's 2-year-old son Josef, who was sleeping in his crib, and the maid Maria Baumgartner, who was sleeping in the kitchen. Maria Baumgartner, 44 years old, had only just arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm to begin working as a maid on the afternoon of March 31, just a few hours before the gruesome massacre occurred. The killer covered the bodies near the livestock barn with hay, while the two bodies inside the house were concealed with bed sheets. Initially, police suspected robbery as the motive behind the murders. However, they later discovered that the Gruber family's significant savings were still untouched inside the house. What was even more terrifying was that the murderer had stayed at the crime scene for several days. The food in the kitchen remained fresh, and not only that, he had fed the livestock, milked the cows on the farm, and used the Gruber family's household items as if everything was normal. The strange events didn't end there. During further investigation, the police discovered that a few days before the massacre, Andreas had told his neighbors that he had seen footprints in the snow leading from the forest to his house, but no footprints leading out. Additionally, Andreas had lost the farm keys, and he had found a strange newspaper in his house. The police interrogated the Gruber family's former maid, who was still very shaken when speaking about the Hinterkaifeck farm. She kept saying that the Gruber family's home was haunted, and she had heard footsteps in the attic. But Andreas didn't believe her. He climbed into the attic to investigate, but found no one. Over 100 suspects were interrogated by Inspector Reingruber and his investigation team regarding the Hinterkaifeck murders. Many were initially considered suspects, but were gradually eliminated due to alibis or lack of sufficient evidence to convict. Nearly 30 years after the Hinterkaifeck murders, a woman named Crescentia Mayer confessed to a priest that her two brothers, Adolf and Anton Gump, were the murderers behind the Hinterkaifeck case. However, by then, Adolf had already passed away. In 1922, Chief Detective Inspector George Reingruber listed Adolf as a suspect. However, after the investigation, it was discovered that Adolf had been involved in the murder of 9 farmers along with 3 accomplices, but he had no connection to the murders at the Hinterkaifeck farm. The police concluded that the killer was likely someone who worked on farms, familiar with tending livestock, and also seemed to have a close connection with the Gruber family's dog. Moreover, the murderer must have been physically strong to use a pickaxe as a weapon, and committed the killings out of personal motives rather than for money. The investigation faced numerous obstacles, from the crime scene being heavily contaminated to several key figures involved in the case being killed during a terrorist attack at the Palace of Justice in Augsburg, Germany, during World War II. To this day, the perpetrator has never been identified, and the massacre remains surrounded by unanswered questions. Why was the former maid so terrified, claiming the Hinterkaifeck farm was haunted? What was the killer's true motive? How could someone commit such brutal murders and then stay at the scene, living among 6 corpses as if nothing had happened? What about the mysterious footprints in the snow, the strange newspaper, and the noises from the attic? All of these remain unsolved mysteries. Many have come to believe that the Hinterkaifeck farm was haunted, that some invisible force took the lives of the Gruber family. As a result, numerous psychics visited the site, but none could provide answers. Even the skulls of the 6 victims, which were sent to Munich for further forensic examination, mysteriously disappeared during World War II. To this day, the 6 victims have been buried without their heads. The massacre at Hinterkaifeck farm is one of the most chilling mysteries in German history. 6 members of the same family were brutally murdered. The killer was never caught, and the motive remains unknown. Strange footprints in the snow, mysterious noises in the attic, an unidentified newspaper appearing out of nowhere. These all paint a cold, dark picture that has yet to be explained. The murderer even lived in the house for several days after the crime, carrying on as if nothing had happened. Spiritual, paranormal, or personal revenge theories have all been suggested, but none have been confirmed. As a result, Hinterkaifeck will forever remain a deep scar in history, where the truth is buried with time and darkness.